Welcome to Everything Mental Health with your hosts, Chris Weeks and Maureen Edwards.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, Maureen. How are you
Here
doing?
we are again.
Yes. So we were talking about attachment styles last time, huh?
Yeah, and that got me thinking about, because these attachment styles, they are sort of created from our primary relationships in childhood. And it got me to think about that patterning that gets laid down in the child's mind based on their attachment and based on what's kind of going around them. What I was thinking of was, I'd love to hear your thoughts. In many, well, probably all children, the first 5 years of life, they're kind of just spongy. And what their relationships are gets laid down in their brain as the primary patterning of how they interact with their world, with relationships, everything. And that's why attachment is so important. But also, that patterning, a lot of the time that can really kind of show how they interact with the world. And what I've noticed in my practice is that there's usually one or two main patterns that sort of have been laid down in the childhood, which dominate the way the person interacts with their world.
Yes.
And it's like unbelievably fascinating, because if you really kind of look into it and sort of dissect it, there might be, say, a pattern of, I'm just going to make one up. Say there's a pattern of powerlessness where the child felt like they didn't have a say, everything was done to them. Maybe they were, their parents divorced. And so there was, custody issues, and the child was going back and forth from household to household, or there was, animosity around this, this arrangement. And the child is left with, well, I either go here, I either go there. I really have no say. I just do what I'm told. I'm just sort of this entity that gets put in different places. And they can, especially young, right? Before the age of 5 or 6 even, that pattern of not having control or having this sense of powerlessness can really become prominent or dominant.
Yes.
And then all of their interactions, maybe not all of them, but they can be painted with this powerlessness theme.
Interesting that you would put it that way, because what came to mind was in his mid-50s, he had experienced a very healthy, it seemed, relationship with his parents growing up until around the age of 5. Had an experience of sexual abuse from a neighbor, and that seemed to disrupt even that level of security that he had experienced up until that age, up until the age of 5, whereby then fell into this spiral of a sense of helplessness and a sense of guilt and a sense of holding back emotions, because I didn't want to express what had happened to the parents. which I think reinforced this sense of helplessness, to the point where, and I mean, there's a tremendous amount of anger that was in there as well, but to the point where in his mid-50s, there was still this sense of helplessness when it came to getting things done. He felt that he always needed to, I shouldn't say always, but he often would, for the simplest of things, how do I make an appointment for the dentist? Can you help me with filling out these papers because I have to get them to this place? And it almost seemed there was a sense of urgency. It needed to be done now. And if assistance wasn't forthcoming because someone else was doing something was busy at the time, he felt rejected. He would often get upset. Well, you don't have time for me. And so it's very interesting, this patterning that from this childhood, and this feeling of helplessness and the guilt that went along with the incident. And what was interesting was that it wasn't a primary caregiver in this situation. It wasn't as if that was the environment would seem, according to him, to be fairly healthy up until this point. And so that patterning the imprint can be so strong that a person doesn't even realize how much they're carrying it with them throughout their life.
Yes.
And to say, well, we can work through this, we can find solutions for this. There's also this sense of despondency, that well, look at how I've ruined my life. Look at how I've the kinds of relationships that I've had which haven't worked out. Look at the kind of relationship that I even had with my kids. My kids are estranged from me. So this helplessness, it continues, and to the point then where the person thinks, well, what's the use? I'm a loser. And so you see how strong, that can
pattern,
be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I love the way you kind of broke that down. So from that feeling of powerlessness, it stemmed, it kind of like branched out into the feeling of helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
the feeling of not being in control or having others
Mm-hmm.
do for me, a feeling of guilt, possibly shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this kind of, I better not try too hard because it's not going to work anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
All
So-
from that.
All from that incident. And I would imagine that there was a little bit of resentment, I think, in there towards the caregivers, because there's, if I've been growing up in this sense of security, and then not too far away, that world gets shattered from a certain incident. Why didn't you prepare me for that? Why didn't you let me know that was going to happen? Even it's not the world that I thought that I was living in. And so in school, even the not striving, a lot of the inclination to sort of develop in certain ways were interrupted.
Right.
And so even in group settings, he felt less than, because he couldn't read. So if there's stuff to be handed out to be read, he couldn't read, so he'd pass on the stuff to the next person.
Right,
Or
right.
in writing stuff up, he would ask someone to help him to write certain things. He knew exactly what he wanted to say,
Yeah.
but he had difficulty trusting that he would be able to write it in the proper way.
what I'm hearing in that is that there was from this powerlessness, which kind of grew, there was a sense of, now I give my power away.
Yes.
If I don't feel powerless, then I give it away. Both are kind of happening. And also what was really interesting in what you just said is sort of this, I desperately want, and maybe did want, to be rescued. And so maybe I psychologically and unconsciously set up my world so that maybe I'll be rescued.
Interesting. And in spite of people stepping in to assist this individual at times, it didn't seem to be enough.
It wasn't a true rescue.
It wasn't a true rescue. Where I asked the guys, there were about 12 guys, that we did an exercise where I asked to think of a negative word that they've either used or someone has used against them, and then to write it down on these sticky notes. And then I asked them all to stand up and stand in a circle, and I randomly stuck these negative words onto each person's back. And then I asked them to walk around and look on each person's back and to try to describe what that word was without saying the word to the person who had the word in the back. And that, there was a lot of laughter, there was a lot of interaction. But then after the exercise, also I asked the guys, how did that feel? And everyone said that didn't feel very good in terms of having a word on your back. And I said that that's kind of like people talking behind your back as well. And then we switched it, and I asked each person to look around the room and write a positive word about each person in the room. So each guy had to write 11 positive words, because there were 12 guys. And then I asked them to stand up again and stick these words onto each person that they'd written a positive word for. So here are 12 men standing in the room now with pink sticky notes of positive words on their chests. And here's a lot of laughter again, this time a lot lighter. And each person got to read off every word that was stuck onto their chest. So we sat down, and each person read the words off and thanked the guys as well for such positive regard. And I asked these guys to hold on to these words also. Hold on to them. Stick them up in your mirror, stick them up in your wall, your door, wherever you need to, just to remind yourself of how others might look at you as well. And yet, as we were engaging in conversation, and it was very interesting for the other men to observe, there was almost a rejection of all of these positive words. And you know how people say, well, you can give a person 9 compliments, and then there's one, small criticism, constructive even, and a person will focus on that one, what seems to be a negative, as opposed to the 9 positive.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's how deep this belief, this core belief, that speaks to how one may continue to think or feel about themselves, about others, and the world. I mean, that the essence of the core belief or the core values that develop as a result of the childhood, the patterns that in the childhood.
And I'm wondering, what would you say is the best way to figure out what these patterns that have developed are? Like, how do people just kind of figure that out?
Well, I think that's where various forms of therapy can play. I think cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy can go so far in helping a person recognize certain patterns. But there are lots of other therapies that I feel that can elicit realizations as well. I mean, sort of, what is it? EMDR is quite effective at being able to take a look at the trauma without being re-traumatized, for example.
Yes. I've found that EMDR is quite good at getting the underlying patterns, you know, as well as inner child work.
Absolutely.
That's very effective.
Yes.
At figuring out what these patterns are.
Yeah, absolutely. Inner child work is I think, quite powerful at being able to bring out realizations in a healthy way. Sometimes it can be very profound, very powerful when individuals actually get in touch with that child who has been wounded as a result of the trauma.
I also wanted to kind of say it doesn't have to be so bleak, as you know, the patterns are very rigid, they're very strong, they are long lasting, and they can manifest and be shown frequently, you know, in how we interact with the world. However, it doesn't mean that it is a life sentence. They can be changed.
Absolutely.
The brain is plastic. The brain is able to learn and able to lay down new patterns.
Yes, there's a lot of hope. It's almost as if this is a lifetime sentence.
Yeah.
And that's not the case at all.
Yes.
So a wonderful component as well, realizing that this is not permanent. There are ways in which we can find relief, we can find hope and actually healing from a variety of therapies. Somatic experience, for example, sound therapy, drumming, yoga, role playing. Bessel van der Kolk talks about the amazing way in which people can see transformation through actually participating in forms of role playing or mindfulness, even meditation. There are so many, strategies I think that people are able to access that can bring them a lot of relief.
I completely agree. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
People changing old patterns, and that's just another thing about this patterning and the attachment styles. If you have an attachment style or a pattern, say you have an anxious or a disorganized attachment, it's not a life sentence. It can be changed.
Yes.
And as you're in therapy, you can keep going back and checking, doing one of those little online quizzes and seeing how you're answering the questions.
Yes.
Because that's something that's very exciting for people when they're going through therapy is, wow, I have a secure attachment, and before I had an avoidant one.
Exactly. Yes.
And it's very exciting to watch these changes happen in real time.
Yes. And isn't it funny how, like I've mentioned to a variety of clients, how then they are able to recognize certain situations that might be certain patterns that might be existing in the environment in which they are now living, whether it's with their partner, with their children, also with their parents. I mean, this, and I had one gentleman say, I'd like to hear the conversation that I'm going to have with my parents, about this. And I'd like to hear what my dad or my mom have to say about this. And he says, I don't think it's going to happen, but he was able to recognize that he had made some shifts in terms of how resilient, he had become out of some of the stuff that he'd realized, So there's always hope.
Absolutely. Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Maureen.